Значит, все-таки на английском. Отлично. So this our lecture is devoted to the international and dynastic ties of Russian dynasty of Rurikids in the 11th century. Usually we pay attention to that of Yaroslav the Wise and his daughters and sons, and it's quite evident and so on, but this part, the first part of our lecture, will be devoted to one very interesting problem connected with a illustrious and brilliant woman of the 11th century, Gertrude of Poland, who was the wife of Iziaslav Yaroslavich. Their marriage occurred in 1040s, and it was connected with very hard events that took part in Poland. Since Gertrude's father, Meshko, son of Boleslav I, Boleslav the Bold, the very Boleslav that took Kiev by storm in 1011 and deprived Yaroslav from Kiev. That Boleslav, whose daughter was married to Svetopolk, that Svetopolk who killed Boris and Gleb, after his death, his only son Meshko, Gertrude's father, was left a king because it was the time when the rulers of Poland were crowned. And when he took power, then there was the so-called pagan uprising. Now we know for sooth that this pagan uprising was true, since the archaeologists had found the churches that were destroyed during this uprising. They were devastated for some time, and afterwards they were restored. And it occurred somewhere in 40s. So Boleslav I died in 1030 and 1025. 1030 is written in our chronicles, and so this was, as I have already said, a very hard time. Though Meshko's wife, Rurikids, was of German origin and she was a relative, blood relative of Othonian dynasty, still his German relatives didn't help him, and so he died being not even the king of Poland. His son Casimir was made to become a monk. We don't know anything about Gertrude. Maybe she was a nun, maybe she wasn't. It's not for sooth. And at last, when Poland, as usual, was in ruins, and during this havoc, they decided to bring back their king, and so Casimir was taken back, and they even plead for the Pope to let him leave the monastery and return to Poland and become the king. And at that moment, we don't know the year for sooth, it was something 1043, 45 maybe, he married Yaroslav's sister, not daughter, but sister. We know her Christian name, Mary, and the Polish texts of the 13th century, not 11th, but 13th, they say that she was daughter of Vladimir by his Byzantine wife Anne Parthenogenita. Though it's a great question really, since it's written only in the 13th century. And his sister Gertrude married Iziaslav, Yaroslav's son. So it was a rather funny situation, because Iziaslav married aunt and Gertrude married the nephew. That was the position. But we must remember that Yaroslav was much older, and so his own children were a little bit older than this daughter of Vladimir, even if she was really daughter by Anna, and not his last wife. And so we wouldn't know much about Gertrude. She is mentioned without any name as usual only in the life, vita of Feodosy of the cave monastery of Kiev, Feodosy Pechersky, written by Nestor of the cave monastery in Kiev. And she is only mentioned there. And there is the other mentioning, her marriage is mentioned, but unfortunately, as I have told already, without date and unlike her brothers, only in the 15th century text. But we are very lucky, since we have the so-called Egbert Psalter. Now I shall show you why it is really Egbert Psalter. That was connected to Gertrude. It belonged to Gertrude, and she added to this wonderful book a lot of folios that were connected with her life and her interests. This is the first part of these added folios. The Monologium, as we call it in Greek, Месяцеслов in Russian, or calendar in Latin. So let us move. This calendar also is of special interest, but now we move to this wonderful folio. You can see it. This is the prayer of Gertrude, one of her prayers, the next, the third, and so on. But the most interesting thing is the portrait of Gertrude herself, kneeling at the feet of St. Peter, of Apostle St. Peter. They're very bad visible. Now you can see this inscription in Russian and Old Russian. Mati Yara Polcha. You can see her vestment. Her face, unfortunately, only partly served. Her son, Yaropolk, now we shall look at this inscription, especially it is of special interest, and his wife, Iron. It was her Christian Orthodox name, Iron, and we know that she was really Kunigunda of Orlamund dynasty. So, now let us look for this text a little bit forward, so you can see the different handwriting of these prayers. And that is why some scientists believe that part of this handwriting, this of course not this one, this the latest part, was of Gertrude herself. So there is an idea that she wasn't only the composer of these prayers, but she was even the scribe. Of course, it's only a theory. About her writing these prayers herself, it's also the question. Now you can see these wonderful miniatures, the Nativity of Jesus Christ. The Nativity of Jesus Christ. Now it will take it a little bit better. And crucifixion. There are special articles devoted to these texts. Brilliant article by Smirnova, and you can look through it if you need it. And now, the other thing that we shall pay great attention to, the wedding or the crowning. It's also the question of Yaropolk and his wife Iron. And pay attention to the Christ, Jesus Christ, сидяй на херувимах, sitting on the cherubs and ophanims, the winged wheels from Old Testament. And now just for us to see a little bit of the Egbert of the Egbert Psalter. Here are also the prayers, credo, Latin credo, and and Egbert part. So you see the difference between the part of the 10th century, when this psalter was fulfilled for Egbert, Bishop of Trier, and the difference between the part made 100 years later for Gertrude herself. And still there is another interesting thing we must pay attention to. Now we return to our texts. Pay attention to this. It wasn't good seen at the online codex, and you see here two language inscription. Ho, Dikeos, Yarapolk. Pay attention that the Greek inscription is made with a mistake. It mustn't be Dikeos, Dikeos, yes? It must be Dikeos. And Yarapolk is written in Russian. Yaropolk with year after P, Yarapolk, because if our artists copied South Slavic inscription, he would write Yarapolk in that way, with year after the L. And here we see it in this way. So it is a great question, who was the artist? Of course, he was of Greek origin, he was of Greek school, it's forsooth, but the question is whether he wrote these inscriptions himself, because it's quite natural for the artist to make a mistake in an inscription. It's quite normal. Or whether some Russian scribe, or maybe even artist, helped him to do this inscription. I can make it a little bit bigger, if you need. No, it's Dikeos. It's here. So we see that these follows have three languages: Latin language, Greek language, and Old Russian. So all the parts of Gertrude's lives are very well seen. Her first education, most of all probability, is in some Latin monastery, nunnery, not monastery, nunnery, because it looked as if she also was destined to become a nun as her brother. Then her life as a Russian queen. I go after Raffensperger and say queen, not princess for that time. And her connection, together with her husband, with Greek artists. The same group that had commissioned the so-called Изборник Святослава 1073 года, Sviatoslav's collection of 1073. But we remember that at first it was made not for Sviatoslav, but for Iziaslav himself. And just for you to see the other way of representing the queen kneeling at the feet of the saint, Queen Emma, wife of the not king that time. She was a queen because she was a widow, and her husband was a prince of Czechs, Bohemian prince Boleslav II, and she is kneeling at the feet of Boleslav the saint, of Vyacheslav the saint, who was killed by Boleslav I, Boleslav II's father. This is just for you to look and to see how these beautiful garments were made in the 11th century. The other lady that we shall pay attention forward. So, the last of our miniatures that have a great importance for us if we speak about the history of old Jerusalem and its connection. The crowning, or maybe marriage, I have also said that is a question of Yarapolk and his wife Kunigunda Iron. As for Kunigunda, she was also, as I have told, of German origin. And Nazarenko wrote everything, wrote very good about it, and you can look at his books. And now I shall only specialize that thanks to her mother Adela, she was a relative of ruling Emperor Henry IV. But though she was a relative, the thing was that her stepfather of Kunigunda, he was an enemy of Henry IV, of Emperor Henry IV. And why it is very important for us? Because Henry was seeking a union against his inner German enemies. He was seeking this union not only in Germany itself, but also in the outer countries. And that's why he married his relative Oda to Sviatoslav Yaroslavich. It was his second wife. And we know that Sviatoslav Yaroslavich expelled Iziaslav from Kiev. And that time, though Iziaslav Demetrius looked for some help from Henry IV, still he didn't help him, and it was, of course, thanks to his alliance with the Kiev kings of that time. Why we say that there is a great problem with this Yaropolk? The thing is that we have such inscription in Saint Sophia of Kiev, in the Cathedral of Saint Sophia of Kiev, very famous. It was first published by Rybakov, and it is written here. Господи, помози рабе своей Алисаве, святополчи матери, русские и княгини. The last line is of great question. If we can read something like as psal сын сущий. It was a variant of Rybakov. But the thing is that she is called here Alisava, Sviatopolcha's mother of Sviatopolk. It looks as if everything was quite normal. The elder son Yaropolk, the second son Sviatopolk, everything is all right. But it's not so, because in her prayers she mentions only her son Peter, and she calls him Unicus Filius Meus, the only son of mine, сын мой единственный. Because in Latin it's in version, so we can translate as in version in English and in Russian. Сын мой единственный. So it means that Yaropolk was the only son of Gertrude and Iziaslav. And also, really, he is depicted here only, and he is the only person, the only of her sons, that is mentioned in her prayers. But the Bible prayers mention her conflict, the conflict with her husband. We know that Sviatopolk was born around 1050. It was put in the Tale of Begon's Days, Повесть именных лет, but only in the South Russian version, not in the Laurentian Chronicle. And so it means that when Iziaslav was married to Gertrude, still his wife wasn't alone his wife. He had some other woman whose name was Alisava and who had borne this Sviatopolk. Of course, there was a great discussion concerning this question, because our chroniclers don't like to mention these episodes when there are wives and concubines of one person, of one prince, and when there are children from both of them. They're very rare mentioned, but still it's not such a rare thing when we compare the dates of birth of several princes which are known, the names of their mothers, the days of and the years of their life, and so we understand that this ruling king wasn't born of the legitimate wife. The problem was that that time in the 11th century, in Slavic and in not German, of course, but in Scandinavian lands and England as well, there was no such difference between the legitimate wife and between the mistress. It wasn't so. And very often when the person became a ruling king or ruling prince, he simply made his mother a queen. She was styled as a queen, and this was all. The more important thing, that this inscription was written on the wall, so it's not an official text. We can see that maybe Alisava named herself, styled herself even as a queen, Russian queen, but the thing is, if she really had such a title officially. So this is the problem. Yaropolk had children by his wife, and we know that his son Yaroslav Yaropolchich lived and ruled in Russia. But after he had been killed in 1086, his widow Iron Kunigunde returned to Germany, and she had 2 other husbands and had children by all of them. And we know that Yaropolk and Kunigunde had a daughter, and this daughter lived for long. She died only in the middle of the 12th century. She was 70 years old, and so she must have been born in 1074. That means that this marriage occurred something about 1073, 72. It's the earliest, the latest date. By the by, this pair, Gertrude and Iziaslav, Iron and Yaropolk, were connected with the diplomacy with the Pope, with the Holy See, because when Iziaslav was turned from Rus, his son Yaropolk went to Rome, and he went to the newly elected Pope Gregory VII. But Gregory VII mastered the Rome policy for 20 years before that, and he asked help, and we know that he returned to Henry IV with the letter of the Pope. This letter was first published by Turgenev in the 19th century, in 1843, but unfortunately it was not the original. It was a copy, and there is no new publication of these texts. So this is a great task to look at it again, knowing what we do know now. And there was a question: if Yaropolk could have become a Latin Christian, could he go to the Rome to adopt the Latin rite? But we remember that when he was killed, he was buried in St. Demetrius Monastery, and it was written so in the Tale of Bygone Days. «Изыди противу ему, Ярополку, благоверный князь Всеволод со своими сынами, с Владимиром Ростиславом, все бояре, блаженные митрополиты Иоанн с чернорисцы и просвитеры, и все кияне велик плач сотвориша над ним, со псалмы и песнями проводиша до святого Дмитрия, спрятавши тело его, с честью положивши братцы мраморяне, в церкви святого апостола Петра юже без сам начал сдать. And then there is a great praise for him, so it is mentioned that he was buried in the monastery of St. Demetrius, built by his father, in the church of St. Peter that he had begun to build himself. It was founded by him. And this great praise for him and for his daughter, who died long after that, mentioned their great connection with the cave monastery, and both of them, Yaropolk and his daughter, this Yaropolkovna, wife of Gleb of Polotsk, they are praised for their big love of the cave monastery and their big donations to this monastery. It means that he died in the same Eastern church where he was born and where he was Christianed, where he was baptized. So these wonderful texts and this Pope's letter show us all the collision of the second part of the 11th century. And the most interesting thing, of course, is though the churches were split, it was the time of the Great Schism of 1054, still there were relations. We know the letter of new Metropolitan of Kiev, Clement III, to the anti-Pope Clement. We know that there were relations. We know that there were letters. We know that there were numerous marriages. We just paid attention to the most illustrious and to the most important. And it looks as if there was no idea of that splitting the churches, that great schism, was for a long time. It looks as if they were waiting for this problem to be resolved. We know that it was never resolved, but it was not the idea of the 11th century. By the by, in the 12th century, we shall see numerous marriages of the Byzantine emperors, of the emperors of Constantinople, of their daughters, their nephews, their sisters to the different Western rulers, and the numerous marriages of themselves to Western princesses. So, when we read the texts written by our monks, they tell the Russian princes and Russian kings that you mustn't give your daughters as brides to Western rulers. Still, they continued to do that. And these ties were really important, and these women played a great role not only in politics, but as we can see in the cultural life as well. Thank you, that's all.
Спасибо.
Все?